Apache woman rejected the quiet cowboy. 5 years later, he rode back with 500 men. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now let's dive into the story. In the dusty plains of the Wild West, where the sun set like a fiery blaze over the horizon, there lived a cowboy named William. Known for his quiet demeanor and sharp eyes, he wasn't the type to boast or make a fuss. He kept to himself, working the land he had inherited from his father, and spent his nights under the wide, starlit sky, his thoughts often drifting to her. Her name was Ayanna, a woman of the Apache tribe, with dark eyes that held secrets, strength, and a certain mystery that William couldn't resist. She was a beauty, but it wasn't just her looks that intrigued him. It was the way she carried herself, proud, fierce, and untouchable. He had first seen her from a distance, as she led her tribe through the rugged mountains, her horse moving with the grace of the wind. He knew then that she was someone who would not be easily swayed. It was during a trading event at a small town near his ranch that he first approached her. He had heard of her before, stories of her courage, her defiance against the settlers who were encroaching on their land. William, being a quiet man by nature, wasn't one to make the first move. But something about Ayanna pulled him in, a force he couldn't explain. He had asked for a simple conversation, and to his surprise, she agreed. They talked for hours under the vast sky, her voice like a melody he couldn't get out of his head. Yet, when it came time for him to express his feelings, she rejected him, her gaze hardening as if she had already made up her mind. "You are a cowboy," she had said, her words sharp like the edge of a blade. "And I am Apache. Our paths are not meant to cross." Her words stung, but William didn't give up. He admired her strength, her pride, and in the depths of his heart, he knew that their story wasn't over. She had refused him that night, and he respected her decision, but something deep within him told him he had to prove himself. William went back to his ranch, a fire burning in his chest. He worked day and night, training himself, learning the ways of the land even more, becoming stronger, faster, and more capable. He spent years building connections, making alliances, and gaining the respect of those around him. But all the while, Ayanna's words echoed in his mind. He had to prove he wasn't just another cowboy. He had to show her he could stand tall beside her, no matter the odds. 5 years passed, and in that time, William transformed. No longer the quiet cowboy, he had become a man of influence, a man with power. But Ayanna still haunted his thoughts, and he knew that the day would come when he would return to her, not as the man she had rejected, but as someone worthy of her respect, her trust, and maybe, just maybe, her love. Little did Ayanna know, William was about to return, not alone, but with 500 men by his side. And when he rode back into her life, everything would change. 5 years passed, and William's life had changed in ways he never could have imagined. What had started as a simple desire to win the heart of an Apache woman had transformed into something far greater, a journey of personal growth, strength, and the accumulation of power. The quiet cowboy who had once ridden alone across the plains now commanded the respect of hundreds of men, many of whom had fought beside him in battles, built settlements, and faced the harsh challenges of the frontier. His days were filled with planning, leadership, and the weight of responsibility that came with the alliances he had formed. Yet despite all of this, one thing never left his heart, the memory of Ayanna. It was a burning, quiet fire that never faded. His thoughts would often wander back to her, her fierce independence, her proud spirit, and the words she had spoken all those years ago. She had rejected him, but in her rejection, there was a challenge. She had not dismissed him outright. No, she had simply set a condition. Prove yourself. Prove that you were worthy. Prove that you were more than just another cowboy. And prove it, William did. It wasn't about gaining her approval anymore. It had become about self-actualization. But now, after years of shaping his destiny, William found himself at a crossroads. He stood on the edge of the land he had built, overlooking the horizon that stretched beyond the valley where Ayanna had lived. He knew the time had come to return, and this time, He wouldn't be returning alone. He had gathered 500 men, warriors, settlers, and allies, all bound by the common cause of standing with him. His army wasn't just a symbol of strength. It was a testament to everything he had learned and fought for in the years since Ayanna had first turned him away. As he prepared to ride back to the Apache lands, William could not shake the feeling of uncertainty that gripped him. What if she still rejected him? What if his return with an army only proved to her that he was no different than the others who had tried to dominate her people? But as he mounted his horse, the weight of his decision settled into his bones. He wasn't going back to conquer. He was going back to offer something greater: respect. Respect for her people, and for the land they shared. As William and his men crossed the plains, the journey seemed longer than it had ever been before. The path to Ayanna's tribe was fraught with the memories of what had been said, what had been done, and what had been left unsaid. The wind blew cold, but it did little to calm the storm brewing in William's heart. As they neared the border of Apache land, the sound of hooves was almost drowned out by the silence that had fallen over him. He was close now, close to the place where he had first met Ayanna, close to the moment that would change everything. And then, there it was. The Apache camp. It appeared like a mirage on the horizon, seemingly still, yet full of life and movement. The warriors, the tents, the symbols of Apache culture that had been fiercely protected for generations. William's heart raced as his horse carried him closer. He could see the figures now, the strong and proud figures of the Apache people. The warriors who had once been Ayanna's people, now watching him with the same intensity he had once felt when he first met her. And then, she appeared. Ayanna, standing tall, just as he remembered her, her eyes meeting his from across the distance. She hadn't changed, but he had. Time had altered them both. The years had shaped their paths, and now they were at an intersection once more. Ayanna's expression was unreadable, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. William dismounted and walked toward her, every step a reminder of the journey he had taken to get here. As he approached, she didn't move. She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she studied him, her gaze piercing as if searching for the man who had once stood before her, unsure of himself and unworthy of her trust. William finally spoke, his voice steady but carrying the weight of everything he had carried with him. "I've come back, Ayanna. Not to fight, but to stand with you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she walked toward him, her steps purposeful. When she finally reached him, she looked up at him with those dark eyes that seemed to see through the years, through the distance, and through everything he had built. And then, she spoke. "You've come back, William. But it's not just you who stands here now. It's your actions that have brought you here." Her words were calm, but there was a quiet strength in them. William felt a sense of relief wash over him. She hadn't rejected him outright. She hadn't dismissed him. Instead, she was acknowledging everything he had done. The journey he had taken was far from over, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was finally where he was meant to be. The air was thick with tension as William and Ayanna stood in front of each other, their gazes locked, both silently acknowledging the years that had passed since their first meeting. The moment felt suspended in time, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for one of them to speak. Finally, Ayanna broke the silence, her voice as steady and commanding as ever. "You've come back with an army, William. What do you seek here? Do you seek to claim what isn't yours? Or have you truly come to stand with us?" William looked at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had prepared for this moment for so long, yet now that it was here, he found himself struggling to find the right words. The truth was simple, though. He wasn't here to claim anything. He wasn't here to conquer. He had come to fight alongside her, to prove that he wasn't the same cowboy who had once been rejected by her. "I have come to stand with you, Ayanna. Not as a conqueror, but as an ally. I have spent years learning, growing, and building a future that I believe can be shared." Ayanna studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Behind her, the Apache warriors stood in perfect silence, their eyes trained on the two of them. She had never been one to show weakness, never one to reveal her vulnerabilities. But something in William's words struck a chord deep within her. "If you truly wish to stand with us, then prove it," Ayanna said, her voice cool but firm. "Words are easy, William. It is actions that matter. Will you fight beside us when the time comes, or will you turn your back on us again, like the others before you? William nodded, his resolve hardening. He had not come here to turn away. He had not come here to leave empty-handed. I will fight beside you, he said, his voice filled with conviction. I will prove that I am worthy of the trust you give me. Ayanna didn't speak for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as she considered his words. Then, without warning, she turned and signaled to the warriors behind her. They moved in unison, circling William and Ayanna, their movements fluid and precise. William felt a sense of unease, but he stood his ground, watching Ayanna closely. She had put him to the test once again. You will face the trials of our people, Ayanna said, her voice cutting through the tension. Only then will you know if you are truly worthy of standing with us. If you pass these trials, we will accept you. If you fail, you will leave, and you will never return. William's heart raced. He knew that this was more than just a test of strength. It was a test of everything he had learned over the past 5 years, his character, his resolve, his ability to stand with her and her people. As Ayanna stepped forward, her expression softening ever so slightly, she looked him in the eyes one last time. We will see if you are the man you claim to be, William. The trials will begin at dawn. Be ready. With that, she turned and walked away, her warriors following closely behind her. William stood there for a long moment, staring after her, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knew that the trials ahead would be grueling, that he would be pushed to his limits in ways he could not yet imagine. But one thing was certain, he would not back down. He had come too far, endured too much, to turn away now. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, William found himself standing at the edge of the Apache camp, surrounded by the warriors who had once been Ayanna's people. The air was thick with anticipation as Ayanna stood before him, her gaze unwavering. The trials had begun, and William would have to prove himself if he was to stand beside her and her people. The first challenge was simple, yet daunting, a test of endurance. William had to climb the steep cliffs that surrounded the camp, carrying nothing but his strength and determination. The climb was treacherous, the rocks sharp and unforgiving, but William pressed on. Every step was a battle, every inch of ground gained a victory. He felt the sting of exhaustion in his muscles, the burn of his lungs as he gasped for air, but he didn't stop. Not once. As he reached the summit, sweat dripping from his brow, he looked down at the camp below, his chest heaving with the effort. Ayanna stood at the bottom, her eyes watching him closely. You have passed the first trial, she said, her voice carrying up to him. But this is just the beginning. There is much more to prove. William nodded, his heart still pounding. He knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready for whatever came next. He had come this far, and he would not stop now. As the sun dipped lower into the sky, casting long shadows across the desert, William stood at the top of the mountain, his chest heaving with the effort of the climb. The first trial had been brutal, but it was nothing compared to what awaited him. Below, Ayanna's voice carried through the still air. You have proven your endurance, but there is more to a man than his strength. She spoke with a calm certainty, her eyes fixed on him, piercing through the distance. Now you must prove your heart. William wiped the sweat from his brow and took a deep breath. The second trial had begun. He descended the mountain carefully, his muscles sore from the climb, but his resolve hardening with every step. Ayanna's words echoed in his mind. Prove your heart. He didn't understand at first what she meant, but as he reached the base of the mountain, he saw the next challenge laid before him. Before him stood a small village of Apache families, their homes made of wood and stone, nestled near a river. The villagers, men, women, and children, looked up at him with expectant eyes. They were quiet, their faces etched with years of hardship and survival. Ayanna stood at the center, her gaze steady and unreadable. This is your trial, she said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. You will live among the people for 1 week. You will help them, work alongside them, and prove that your heart is as strong as your body. William looked around, his stomach tightening. The people here were not just strangers, they were the lifeblood of the Apache nation. They had suffered, they had fought, and they had survived. And now, they were watching him. Your task is simple, Ayanna continued. Show them that you are not just a cowboy, not just a man with power. Show them that you care. William's mind raced as he nodded. How could he possibly prove something like that? He wasn't a man of words. He was a man of actions. He had always been the strong, silent type, focused on the tasks at hand. But now, he was being asked to show his heart. He spent the next several days working with the villagers. He helped repair the roofs of their homes, dug irrigation channels, and carried heavy loads of firewood. He learned their ways, their rhythms, and their customs. It wasn't easy. The villagers were slow to trust him, but he didn't mind. He had learned that respect couldn't be rushed. It had to be earned, and earning it here meant more than just hard work. It meant understanding their struggles, their stories, and their hopes for the future. One day, as he was hauling a heavy sack of grain, a young boy approached him. His clothes were torn, and his face was covered in dirt, but his eyes were bright and curious. "You work hard," the boy said, his voice quiet but strong. "But can you make the river bring fish?" William paused, looking down at the boy. He wasn't sure what the boy meant, but he had an idea. He had heard stories about how the Apache used their knowledge of the land and water to survive. They knew how to fish, how to trap, how to grow crops in the harshest conditions. "I don't know," William said honestly, "but I will try." The boy smiled, nodding as if he understood. That night, William went to the river with a few of the older men from the village. They showed him the old ways of fishing, using traps and nets to catch the fish that swam just beneath the surface. The water was cold, the current strong, but William worked alongside them, using his strength and learning their techniques. By the time the moon rose high in the sky, they had caught enough fish to feed the entire village. The next morning, as they sat down to a feast, Ayana approached him, her expression softening as she looked at the fish that had been caught. "You have shown them that you are willing to learn, that you are willing to give. You have earned their respect, and in doing so, you have earned mine." William looked up at her, the weight of the trials, the journey, and the years of rejection lifting off his shoulders. For the first time, he felt like he was truly being seen, not as a cowboy, not as a man with power, but as someone worthy of standing beside her and her people. As the days passed, William continued to work with the villagers, gaining their trust and learning their ways. But it wasn't just the work that changed him. It was the conversations with the men and women of the village, the stories they shared about their ancestors, their struggles, and their dreams for the future. William began to see the world through their eyes, to understand the weight of their past and the hope they held for their children. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for them. And when the time came to face the final trial, William knew he was ready. He had proven his heart, his strength, and his willingness to stand beside Ayana and her people. And when Ayana asked him to take the final step, he didn't hesitate. He had already made his decision. He had already found his place among them. The sun had barely risen the following morning, casting long shadows over the Apache village as William stood beside Ayana at the edge of the camp. The weight of the previous day's trials still rested heavy on his shoulders, but there was no turning back now. His heart raced with anticipation, knowing that the final trial awaited him, and with it, the answer to his place among the Apache people and Ayana's life. As the final trial approached, William could feel the eyes of the villagers upon him. They had watched him work, struggled alongside him, and slowly accepted him into their fold. He had proven his strength and heart, but there was still one thing left to show, his loyalty and dedication to their cause. Ayana, standing by his side, gave him a small nod. "This is it," she said softly, her voice steady as always. "The final test is not one of strength or skill, but of loyalty. You will face your greatest challenge yet." William nodded, a sense of resolve settling within him. He had already fought the hardest battles of his life, but this trial would be different. This time, the stakes were not just for him, but for the future of the Apache people. As Ayana led him toward the center of the camp, William saw the men and women of the tribe gathering in a circle around them, their faces serious and expectant. In the center stood an elderly man, his long white beard and piercing eyes commanding respect. He was the tribe's spiritual leader, a man who had seen generations come and go. He raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. "William," the elder's voice echoed across the camp, "you have proven your strength, your heart, and your resolve. But now, you must prove your loyalty. You must show that you are willing to fight, not just for yourself, but for the people who stand beside you. Will you do this?" William took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question sink in. He had already made the decision, but now it was time to vocalize it, to commit fully to the path that lay ahead. I will fight for you. I will fight for your people. I will stand beside Ayanna and her tribe, no matter what the cost, he said, his voice steady and clear. The elders studied him for a moment, as if weighing the truth of William's words, and then nodded slowly. Your loyalty will be tested, William. The trial begins now. Without another word, the elder turned and gestured for William to follow. As they moved through the camp, the villagers parted to make way, their eyes fixed on him. William could feel the weight of their scrutiny, but he held his head high, determined to show them that he was more than just a man of words. He was a man of action, and he would prove it. The trial took them deep into the wilderness, away from the safety of the village. The air grew colder, the trees more dense, as they journeyed farther into the land that the Apache called home. It was here, in the heart of the land, that William would face his final test. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a small clearing, where the elder stopped and turned to face William. This is where you will prove your loyalty, the elder said, his voice grave. You must survive the night alone, without food or water, and face the dangers of the land. Only then will you truly know if you are worthy to stand with us. William nodded, his mind racing. He had faced hardships before, but the wilderness was different. The Apache lived and thrived in this land, and now it was his turn to prove he could do the same. As the sun began to set, the elder turned and disappeared into the trees, leaving William alone in the clearing. The first night was the hardest. The wind howled through the trees, and the sounds of the wilderness were eerily quiet. William sat in the clearing, his eyes constantly scanning the darkness around him. He had been taught to survive by the land, but it was a far different thing to face it alone. As the night wore on, he grew tired and hungry. He had no food, no water, and no shelter. Every muscle in his body screamed for rest, but he knew that this was part of the trial. He couldn't give in. He couldn't show weakness. As the hours passed, William began to feel the full weight of his decision. He had chosen to fight for the Apache people, to stand beside Ayanna, and now, this trial was testing his very will to do so. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the trees, William was on his feet, his body aching and his mind clear. He had survived the night. He had proven his loyalty. As the elder returned, his eyes narrowed as he studied William. The trial was over, and William had passed. You have shown your strength, your heart, and your loyalty, William, the elder said. You are worthy to stand with us. William looked up at Ayanna, who stood beside the elder, her eyes softening as they met his. He had made it through. He had earned his place, not just in the tribe, but in her life. The Apache tribe had accepted him, and now, together, they would fight for a future they would build, side by side. The days that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. William had passed the trials, and now he stood alongside Ayanna, ready to face the challenges that awaited them both. The tribe had accepted him as one of their own, but their unity would soon be tested. Word had spread through the region of the Apache people's growing strength, and the settlers, along with the military, were beginning to take notice. The delicate balance of peace was on the verge of tipping. Ayanna, now more resolute than ever, stood at the forefront of the tribe's leadership, and William, though still learning, was now considered one of her most trusted allies. They gathered the tribe's warriors and the villagers, preparing for what was to come. Ayanna had always known that this day would arrive, the day when their way of life would be challenged. But with William by her side, she felt a newfound strength. She could see the determination in his eyes, the man who had once been an outsider, now ready to defend their people. We will not fight for conquest, Ayanna said, as she addressed the warriors and villagers gathered around the fire. We fight to protect our homes, our land, and our future. We fight because we must. William stood beside her, his presence a silent testament to the journey he had taken to earn his place. He had learned not just how to fight, but what to fight for. The days leading up to the conflict were filled with strategy and preparation. William, having led men in battle before, took charge of organizing the defense, while Ayanna worked to unite the different factions within the tribe. She spoke to the elders, the women, and the children, reminding them that this was not just a battle for survival, but for their culture and their legacy. As the first signs of the approaching army appeared on the horizon, the air grew thick with tension. The Apache warriors, armed and ready, stood in formation, awaiting the signal to move. William could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but his mind was clear. He had come a long way since the days of working alone on his ranch. Now, he was standing alongside these brave men and women, ready to protect the people he had come to love. The battle began at dawn. The sound of hooves pounding against the earth, the clash of weapons, and the battle cries of warriors filled the air. William fought with the same determination he had shown during the trials, using the skills he had honed over the years. He fought not just for survival, but for Ayanna, for the Apache people, and for the life they were building together. The battle was fierce. The settlers and soldiers were well armed, but they underestimated the strength and resolve of the Apache. Ayanna, leading her warriors with unmatched courage, fought fiercely alongside William. Their bond, forged in the trials and solidified in the heat of battle, was unbreakable. As the dust began to settle and the sound of battle faded, William stood by Ayanna's side, both of them covered in dirt and sweat, but victorious. The enemies who had come to take their land had been driven back, their forces scattered. The Apache people had shown their strength, and in doing so, they had secured their future. The aftermath of the battle was a quiet one. There were no celebrations, only the heavy silence of survival. The tribe's warriors gathered their wounded, tending to their brothers and sisters in arms. Ayanna, ever the leader, moved among them, offering words of encouragement and strength. William, though weary, could see the pride in her eyes. They had done what they had set out to do. They had protected their people. "You did it," William said quietly, standing beside her as they looked over the camp. Ayanna nodded, her gaze steady. "We did it. Together." The days that followed were filled with healing and rebuilding. The battle had been won, but the fight was far from over. William knew that the future of the Apache people depended on their ability to adapt and survive in a world that was changing rapidly. But as long as he stood by Ayanna's side, he knew they would face whatever came next, together. In the quiet moments, when the camp had settled and the warriors rested, Ayanna and William would sit together by the fire, their hands brushing as they talked about the future. The road ahead would be long, and the challenges would continue to come, but they were no longer alone. They had each other, and that was more than enough. The victory had come at a heavy cost. The Apache tribe had successfully defended their land, but the aftermath was one of loss, exhaustion, and the sobering reality that their fight was far from over. The wounded were many, and the camp was filled with the sounds of those tending to the injured. William moved through the camp, helping where he could, his hands covered in blood from tending to the warriors' wounds. His mind, however, was focused on something more, on the future. Ayanna had always known that peace would be fleeting. She had warned William from the start that the settlers and the military would not stop, that this victory was only a temporary reprieve. And she was right. As the days passed, rumors spread that more soldiers were being mobilized to crush the Apache once and for all. William stood with her as they watched the sun sink below the horizon, casting the camp in an orange glow. "They will come again," Ayanna said, her voice low but filled with resolve. "And this time, we must be ready." William nodded, feeling the weight of her words. They had fought to defend their land, but they needed more. They needed unity, strength, and allies. The next few weeks were spent preparing for what was to come. William helped organize the warriors into smaller groups, each assigned to specific tasks: scouting, building defenses, and fortifying their position. Meanwhile, Ayanna reached out to other tribes who had been watching from afar, unsure of whether to join the Apache in their struggle. Her message was clear. Together, they could stand against the settlers. Without hesitation, several tribes answered her call, sending their warriors to join the Apache in their fight. As the reinforcements arrived, the strength of their alliance grew. It wasn't just warriors who came. Elders, healers, and children arrived with supplies, ready to stand side by side with their Apache brothers and sisters. William watched as the camp transformed before his eyes. The once small Apache village now stood as a symbol of resistance, a force to be reckoned with. And yet, despite the growing strength of their alliance, the tension in the air was palpable. William knew that the settlers and the military would not wait long to make their move. They had underestimated the Apache before, but now they would face a united front. And the Apache, with their allies, would fight to the very end to protect their land and their way of life. As the weeks passed, the signs of an impending battle became clearer. The sky grew darker, and the winds carried the scent of war. William found himself standing on the edge of the camp once more, his mind racing with thoughts of the battle that awaited them. "We've built something here," Ayanna said, standing beside him. Her gaze was distant, but there was a fire in her eyes that William had come to admire. "We've built more than just defenses. We've built a future. We've built hope." William turned to face her, his heart swelling with admiration. He had come to this land as an outsider, but now he was part of something much greater than himself. "And I will fight for that future," he said, his voice steady. "I will fight for you, Ayanna." She smiled softly, her hand resting on his arm. "I know you will," she replied. "But remember, this fight is not just about us. It's about everyone who came before us. It's about the children who will inherit this land, the ones who will carry our legacy." The day of the battle arrived faster than William had anticipated. The Apache and their allies stood ready, positioned along the high ground that overlooked the valley below. The sound of horses' hooves echoed in the distance as the enemy approached. William stood at the front of the line, his rifle in hand, his heart beating in his chest like a drum. Ayanna stood beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon. "They're here," she said quietly. William nodded, his grip tightening around his rifle. The battle would be brutal, but they had prepared for this moment. They had prepared to defend their land, their culture, and their future. As the first shots were fired, the ground beneath their feet shook with the violence of the battle. The Apache and their allies fought with everything they had, their unity and determination fueling each strike. William fought alongside them, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had become a part of their story, and now he would help write the next chapter. The battle raged on for hours, the sound of gunfire and the clash of weapons filling the air. But as the sun began to set, the Apache warriors, alongside their allies, had driven the enemy back. The settlers and soldiers, overwhelmed by the fierce resistance, had retreated. The Apache had won once again. But victory came with a price. The battlefield was littered with the fallen, both Apache and their allies, as well as their enemies. William stood among the warriors, his heart heavy with the loss. He had fought for something greater than himself, but the cost of that fight was undeniable. Ayanna approached him, her face marked with the weariness of battle, but her spirit unbroken. "We have won," she said, her voice quiet. "But the war is not over. This is only the beginning." William nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but he knew one thing for sure. He would face it with Ayanna and their people, side by side, no matter what came next. The days following the battle were filled with quiet reflection and the heavy work of rebuilding. The Apache people, though victorious, had paid a high price. The land, still scarred from the violence of the fight, would take time to heal. William moved through the camp, offering help where it was needed, his body tired but his spirit stronger than ever. Beside him, Ayanna was as determined as ever, organizing the warriors and the families who had come to their aid. The alliance they had formed had proven invaluable, and now, it was time to cement their bonds and prepare for the challenges that lay ahead. Ayanna had spoken the truth. This victory, though significant, was not the end. The settlers and the military would not rest until the Apache were either pushed off their land or destroyed. William knew this, and in the weeks that followed, he threw himself into the task of strengthening their defenses. He worked alongside the warriors, setting up fortifications, training with weapons, and learning the ways of the Apache more deeply than ever before. But there was something different about this time. William was no longer the outsider, the cowboy who had wandered into their world. He was one of them now, fully embraced by the Apache people. He stood with them, not just as an ally, but as a partner, ready to fight alongside them and Ayanna in defense of their land. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. As the seasons shifted, so did the mood of the people. There was an air of anticipation that hung over the camp. Word had come that the settlers were preparing for another assault, a final push to reclaim the land they believed was rightfully theirs. William and Ayanna had known this day would come. They had known that they could not rest on the laurels of past victories. The time for preparation was over. It was time to take a stand. The night before the battle, William sat beside Ayanna by the fire, both of them silent as they gazed into the flames. The crackling of the wood was the only sound that filled the night air. William could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had fought before, but this battle was different. This battle was not just for survival. It was for the future of the Apache people, for the land they had fought for, and for the life they had built together. Ayanna broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. Tomorrow, we fight. But remember, William, this is not just a battle of strength. It is a battle of spirit. Our people have endured so much, and we will endure again. But it is not just our strength that will carry us. It is our unity. William turned to her, his eyes meeting hers. I understand, he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. And I will fight for that unity, Ayanna. I will fight for you, for your people, for all of us. She nodded, her eyes reflecting the same resolve he felt in his heart. Together, she said simply. Always together. The following morning, as the sun began to rise over the horizon, the warriors gathered. The camp was filled with the sound of preparation, the sharpening of knives, the tightening of saddles, the quiet conversations of those who were about to face their greatest challenge yet. William stood among them, his heart pounding, but his mind clear. He had fought for his place here, and now he would fight to protect it. Ayanna stood at the front of the warriors, her presence commanding and unwavering. The tribe had rallied behind her, and William had come to realize that it was not just her strength that made her a leader, but her ability to inspire others to stand beside her. As the battle approached, the air grew thick with the anticipation of what was to come. The settlers, with their guns and soldiers, were marching closer, their numbers overwhelming. But William and Ayanna knew something the settlers didn't. Strength was not only in numbers, but in the will to fight for what you believed in. When the first shots were fired, it was as though time itself had stopped. The Apache warriors, along with their allies, moved with a precision and strength that shocked the enemy. William fought with everything he had, his rifle steady in his hands as he protected the people he had come to call his own. The battle raged for hours, with neither side giving ground. But as the sun began to set, the Apache warriors, bolstered by their allies, began to push the settlers back. The tide of the battle was turning. As the final shots were fired and the smoke of the battle cleared, the settlers were forced to retreat. The Apache had once again proven their strength, but it had come at a cost. The land was littered with the fallen, warriors, settlers, and soldiers alike. William stood among the survivors, his chest heaving with exhaustion, his eyes scanning the battlefield. He had fought for something greater than himself, and now, in the quiet that followed the chaos, he realized that he had found his place in this world. Ayanna approached him, her eyes filled with pride and sorrow. We have won, she said quietly, her voice filled with emotion. But the cost is high. We must honor those who have fallen. William nodded, his heart heavy. We will honor them, Ayanna, and we will continue to fight, for them, for us, for the future. Together, they stood, side by side, watching as the last of the enemy retreated. The battle was over, but the war was not. They had won today, but they knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, and they would face them together, as they always had. The days after the final battle were filled with a mixture of reflection and preparation. The Apache had fought hard, and they had won, but the victory came at a steep price. The ground they fought for, the lives they defended, and the future they were trying to preserve, it all rested heavily on their shoulders. William stood beside Ayanna as they watched the camp come to life in the early morning light. The warriors were rebuilding, repairing the damage from the battle, and the elders were speaking of the future, planning for the next steps. It was clear to William that this victory was only one part of the long journey ahead. They had survived another attack, but there would always be more challenges to face. Ayanna, ever the leader, walked among her people, speaking with the warriors, the elders, and the women who had supported the tribe through thick and thin. She moved with purpose, her strength undiminished by the hardships they had endured. William watched her with admiration. He had come to know her as a fierce leader, a woman who had weathered countless storms and yet never wavered in her determination. He had learned from her, not just about survival, but about what it meant to truly protect and lead. It was in those moments, as they worked together, that William realized something important. This was his home now. The Apache people were his people, and Ayanna was no longer just a distant figure in his past. She was his partner, and together they would face whatever came next. The bond between them had grown stronger with each passing trial, and now, as the days turned into weeks, that bond had deepened into something more. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the camp settled into a peaceful quiet, William found Ayanna by the fire. She was sitting alone, her gaze fixed on the flames as if lost in thought. He approached her quietly, taking a seat beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The crackling of the fire was the only sound that filled the night. "Do you ever wonder," Ayanna said finally, her voice soft but steady, "if this will ever end?" William looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He had often wondered the same thing. The struggle for survival, the constant threat of war, the endless fight to protect the land. It all seemed like an unending cycle. But in that moment, he understood something. "Maybe it won't ever end," he replied, his voice thoughtful. "But as long as we have each other, we can face whatever comes. We'll keep fighting, not just for ourselves, but for the future we want to build." Ayanna turned to him then, her eyes meeting his. There was a softness in her gaze, a recognition of everything they had fought for, everything they had lost, and everything they had gained. "Together," she said simply. "Always together." William smiled, the weight of the world lifting off his shoulders. Together, they had already overcome so much. And together, they would face the future, no matter what it held. As the fire burned low and the night settled around them, William knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be difficult, and there would be more battles to fight, but they would fight them together. The Apache had found strength in unity, and now, with Ayanna by his side, William knew that they would continue to build a future. A future where their people could thrive, where the land would remain theirs, and where the legacy of their ancestors would live on. The challenges would continue to come, but so long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. And with that, as the stars began to fill the sky above them, William and Ayanna sat side by side, ready for whatever the future might bring. Together, they were unstoppable,